It's my pleasure now to introduce Paul Fain, who will moderate this panel. Paul Fain serves as news editor for Inside Higher Education, one of today's most important forums for higher education news and analysis. And I want to extend my personal thanks for the privilege of working with you. I value great reporters, great believer in journalists, and it's been a real honor at ACTA to work with Paul. Paul's journalism awards include one for beat reporting from the Education Writers Association and the Dick Schaap Excellence in Sports Journalism Award. And our panel today has four distinguished leaders in higher education: Michael Adams, the Chancellor of Pepperdine University, the Emeritus President of the University of Georgia; Michael Berghoff, Chairman of the Purdue University Board of Trustees; Stephen Ludwig, Regent at the University of Colorado; and our own Anne Neal, Senior Fellow, President Emerita of ACTA, my predecessor to whom I owe so very much. Paul, thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me here. Not everybody appreciates journalists, so I always good to hear. So I'm just going to very briefly summarize the bios of the esteemed panelists here, and then we'll get into opening statements, and then a moderated Q&A, and then questions from all of you. So obviously that was a great panel, a tough act to follow, but I'm confident that these folks will match them. So to my left is Mike Adams, as you heard, Chancellor of Pepperdine University. It's recognized as one of ACTA's A schools for its outstanding core curriculum. Previously, he was president of the University of Georgia, also an ACTA A university, where he emphasized high academic standards and the optimal use of building and classroom resources through a 7-day campus model. To his left, Michael Berghoff, Chairman of Purdue University's Board of Trustees. Mr. Berghoff is an alum of Purdue and the founder and president of Lennox Steel Corporation. In addition to serving as chair of Purdue's board, he also is a member of the board of directors for the Indiana Chamber of Commerce. To his left, Anne Neal, ACTA Senior Fellow and President Emerita. Ms. Neal is the current president of the Garden Club of America. Previously, she served as president of ACTA for over 20 years. She's a First Amendment lawyer and author of a newly released book, What's a Parent to Do? How to Help Your Child Select the Right College. She's also given expert testimony on higher education before federal and state lawmakers. And finally, last but not least, Stephen Ludwig is Regent of the University of Colorado. Mr. Ludwig was elected to the Colorado Board of Regents in 2006, re-elected in 2012. He's an alum of CU, broadcast journalism, public relations, and strategic communications. So with that, Mike Adams, you want to take us away?
Thank you, Paul. It's good to be here. I appreciate what you've done most of the times. I've agreed with you, not always, but
I'll take that.
That's a pretty good recommendation for a journalist. And if you find a college president that anyone has agreed with all the time, they're probably not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So I'm honored to be here. There are a lot of things I could talk about this morning, but I think the reason I was asked to come this year is that I have recently been at two places with very strong curricula. I believe in that, and I want to say a word or two very quickly about that. And I think probably the two most important items in educational success today are who teaches our children and what will they teach. And I know most of the Washington-based educational alphabet organizations. I've led about as many of them as anybody, from NICU to ACE to Nasuljic to SACS. And in the spirit of full disclosure, where Paul and I first got to know each other, I did a 3.5-year term as chair of the NCAA, and we solved all of those issues, as I think all of you know. But it was surprising to me that until the emergence of ACTA, nobody was focusing almost exclusively on these two areas. Who will profess and what will they profess? So on more than one occasion, Dr. Polyakov has asked me, how has this happened at the places you've been? And while I don't really take a lot of personal responsibility, I do take some responsibility, and I think it's part of today's administrative responsibility to create a climate that has led the faculty to endorse and to develop strong curricula. What I want to particularly contribute to today's discussion is that we have a responsibility to be concerned about what's taught, what the core looks like, how we're going to expand access and control costs by also being more efficient, that all of the changing models, if they are to be successful, must also cleave to some old verities, as Faulkner would say, which alone make higher education worthy. I've spent almost a dozen years now, over 2 stints at Pepperdine, a top 50 religiously affiliated university of around 7,500 students. Our Christian origins and value systems mean that Western heritage, the value of the individual, and religious tolerance are part of the DNA. Will Durant once said, while on the faculty at Pepperdine, "Oh, to teach Christ and Plato and Socrates and Cicero on these hills in this setting at the edge of the Pacific Basin," which he believed was the future of the world. Last year, according to the Institute for International Education, Pepperdine led the nation in percentage of students with a residential study abroad experience of at least a semester or a year. We believe very much in creating a world citizen in the process, and fully 85% of our graduating seniors had a residential study abroad experience at one of the 7 locations around the world that we own. A Pepperdine curriculum today calls for at least 2 years of English, accomplishments in higher math, social sciences, use of a foreign language, a couple hard science courses, and both an Old and New Testament survey. Some may call this a traditional approach along with one's major, but courses in Western history and American history lead, we think, not only to a sound curriculum, but to the development of better citizens. The charge that such a curriculum is outmoded sort of pales in an analysis that each year offers around 13 applications for each of our 1,000 freshman seats. I believe that students and parents today, even as expensive as we are in Malibu, causes people to vote with their feet. I don't think the Pepperdine success is due just to location or battle of the network stars. Center College, where I served as president for 9 years, maintains a collegial agreement with the Presbyterian Church, perhaps the denomination historically most committed to higher education. Center, which has long been the top-rated academic institution in Kentucky, has for 200 years maintained a strong traditional core. From day one, that's embodied by a strong faculty with roots embedded in Western civilization from some of America's top graduate schools. The campus houses the first church of any denomination west of the Alleghenies. During my 9 years at Center, I was able to personally interview every faculty candidate. Consultation with the appropriate faculty and departmental committees took place before an offer was made. I've learned through the years that the best way to avoid pain and tenure issues down the road where faculty are involved is to get it right on the front end. If that doesn't work to full satisfaction, then we've put some teeth in all the places I've been into the third-year mid-tenure reviews. I don't know of a single case an institution has lost in litigation when a candidate was unfavorably reviewed at the end of a third-year probationary period, and I have consulted with numerous institutions about the role to accomplish such at mid-tenure reviews. My most trying times curriculum-wise occurred during my 16 years as president of the University of Georgia. The early 2000s were a time of rapid academic rising at UGA. In the early days of the Hope Scholarship and before the financial crash of 2008, board scores at Georgia went from the high 1100s to over 1300 in a relatively short period of time. Quality and values versus the competition propel UGA to the top 20 of American public universities. The combination of 2 strong provosts, one of whom moved on to be president of my alma mater, Ohio State, and extraordinary faculty leadership created a climate for a curriculum graded A by ACTA and was lauded by several entities as one of the strongest in America. At one point during this time period, the New York Times called UGA the most rapidly rising university in America. It's impossible today to graduate from UGA without broad exposure to English, high-level math, the hard sciences, social sciences, and Western heritage. Again, the university is in the top research universities of students doing study abroad situation, which I did have a major hand in creating. In addition to about 80 bilateral study arrangements, the University Foundation bought campuses in Oxford, in Cortona, Italy, and in Costa Rica. Let me add in closing, and stay within my time limit, that the kind of great education I'm describing is remarkably cost-effective. When a school uses its classrooms and laboratories on Friday afternoons, as we did, and holds classes at 8 a.m. every morning, it prepares young people for the realities of the world of work, and at the same time it husbands well resources and avoids unnecessary, costly building, although we did add over 1 million square feet to a campus of 36,000 students. When a university has a well-designed core curriculum, it is not squandering its most precious resource, expert faculty, on a massive cafeteria line of random course. These often courses are under-enrolled and a strain on the instructional budget that does not lead to the student learning we seek. In today's changing model of higher education, not just innovation, but common sense and great use of our most important resource and our most expensive resource, our faculty, serves us well. One can be a first-rate institution with a strong core curricula, and everybody benefit in the process.
Great. Mr. Berghoff.
All right, thank you. Good morning. My name is Mike Berghoff, and I am the chair at Purdue University. And pretty certain I was invited to participate in this panel because at least ACTA and maybe some of all of you have seen maybe a steady stream of what you might call innovations, disruptions, or even experiments coming out of Purdue for roughly the last 3 or 4 years. And this being a panel to discuss the changing model of higher education led most likely to the invitation. That plus probably Mitch was already booked for today, so got me. But I'm going to share what I think at least are some of the top 2 or 3 things we're working on that people are noticing. But before doing it, I think it's helpful if you understand a little bit of the background of our place, our board, and the president, because it has a lot to do with being able to try and do some of the things we're doing. First, the university. We are a land-grant university, Purdue University, about ready to celebrate our 150th year. Our student body population on campus in West Lafayette is about 40,000. 30,000 undergrads, 10,000 graduates. About 55% of the students are Indiana residents. 35 are out of state, and the balance being international students. Our tuition for in-state students is roughly $20,000, and our tuition for out-of-state students is roughly double that. The board is made up of 10 members, one of which is a student. All of the members are appointed by the governor. 3 of the members are nominated by our alumni association, but still have to be appointed by the governor. I was appointed by Governor Mitch Daniels. Just a quick story there. It says more about Mitch than it does about me. Mitch and I really didn't know each other. I'm a Mitch supporter. But on the financial spectrum, my donations to Mitch were pretty small. I think I donated $500 once and another $2,500 because a friend of mine was hosting a party for Mitch's reelection, and you all know how that goes, right? I didn't even go to the dinner, but I did write a check for $2,500. So I got a call from the governor's office, and it was his chief of staff, and wanted to know if I was interested in being a trustee. I had no idea what he was talking about. I thought maybe it was the township I lived in. I said I was interested and went down to Mitch's office for the interview in the governor's office. And he told me one of the reasons he was interested in me is because I wasn't a donor and we didn't know each other. So that's for a politician. I'm not sure I'd really even call Mitch a politician. I mean, he spent 8 years in elected office and that was it. But that struck me. And then we spent about 2 hours talking about both of our thoughts about lots of different topics, education being one of them. And as I was walking out the door, he said, you know, you're the guy. So that kind of surprised me. And off we went. And that same scenario probably repeated itself for the other 9 members on the board. We are all CEOs of businesses, with the exception of the students. We have a former CEO of McDonald's Corporation, a high-level CEO of a division of Cummins. We have probably one of the largest privately held seed companies in the country, CEO there. Former CEO of JCPenney, which is all great for many of the things that we encounter at the board level, but it does create a blind spot. We don't have any academic position represented in the board meetings. We have no doctors, no lawyers, which many would argue is a good thing. So it does create a blind spot, but it allows at least an openness to risk and taking chances. And that's one of the reasons why some of the things we're doing we're able to do. So I was on the board about 3 years when we kicked off the search for a new president, and I led the search that resulted in Mitch, which further complicated for some people, the relationship between Mitch appointing me leading the search, and Mitch becoming president. There were some who actually thought it was a 5-year plan that we instituted back in 2008 aimed at delivering Mitch as the president of Purdue University.
Brilliant.
It was brilliant.
Yeah, well done. Yeah.
Beautifully executed.
Very well done.
So anyway, we knew, you know, if you have a board like that, you know, who are you looking for? You're looking for somebody who's willing to take a risk, who's willing to innovate, who always keeps their feet moving. And I think Purdue was ready for something different at the time. And so ultimately, we hired Mitch in January of 2013. And so now let me shift gears into some of the I'm just going to call them innovations. You can call them whatever you want, disruptions, experiments, ideas. But that's when the output started to become public. And one of the very first things he talked about, actually was in his interview, is he said, I was aware of what was happening in higher education year upon year of tuition increases, and he wanted to investigate changing the business model in higher ed. So shortly after he came on board, we started talking about a tuition freeze. So we approved it, and we have now approved the 6th year of a tuition freeze at Purdue. And I guess I can save the logic for later, for the questions if you want to know how we're doing it. But maybe I'll just answer that question right now. You know, I'd like to say we did a lot of modeling to make sure the forecast would prove itself out, and all that. That's not the case. We have a 150-year-old institution that's been globbed on, you know, over that time period, and a steady stream of revenue. And we just knew there was fat in there. We just didn't know where it was. So we decided just to starve it out. And so we turned the spigot off. And so everybody had to do with what they had before. And so the main metric we've been watching is our operating surplus. Okay? And so we're having a hard time turning the spigot back on until the operating surplus gets to a level where we think it's risking the long-term viability of the university. We're not there yet, but we're probably getting pretty close. So that was probably the first thing that caused a lot of news. Now, at the same time, you should know that we've provided 3.5% increases to faculty, not in every year. It hasn't been at 3.5 in every year, but probably 3 or 4 out of the 5. We found other areas of cost savings, to wring cost out of the organization. So it's not all been a subtraction equation. The second thing is we got very frustrated trying to increase our number of underrepresented minorities on campus. We found ourselves throwing scholarship money at probably students who didn't need it. Perfect example is the daughter of one of our board members is CEO of, as I mentioned, McDonald's. He didn't need the money. She ended up, with 15 offers. She ended up going to Stanford. She was getting our full scholarship. And we just started scratching our heads and said, let's build our own pipeline. So we decided to open Purdue High School in the inner city of Indianapolis. This fall is the first class that got admitted. Roughly 200 students. It's a 9 through 12. Roughly 200 students. It's part of the Indianapolis Public School District in that the money that they receive from the state goes with the student, and so that pays for their tuition. But it's supplemented by Purdue and donors and grants. And so we have roughly 200 students in the freshman class. And if qualified at the end of those 4 years, the idea is it'll be a pipeline to Purdue. And so we thought it'd be a good way to add to the URM numbers. By the way, it's open enrollment. So if you're from the district, we don't get to hand select who we get. If you live in that district, you get to go to the school. So it's project-based learning, a lot of collaboration with industry. We've hired all the teachers. We're in charge of the curriculum. It's high risk. There's a good number of folks who are probably eager to see it fail. It could fail. But if it works, it's probably going to be one of the things we're most excited about. And then third, and the most recent, is our acquisition of the formerly for-profit online university called Kaplan University. And it's been approved by the Indiana Commission for Higher Education. It's been approved by the Department of Education, and we are awaiting approval from the Higher Learning Commission. And that won't be heard until probably, or voted upon until February. So we're in a bit of a waiting period. But that did gather a lot of attention, and I can talk about that later. I'll save that because I'm running on time, and I get a lot less interesting past the 6-minute mark. But all of this, amongst other things, has resulted in what I think is some market response. I don't think it's coincidental, but we've had, last couple of years, record number of applications at Purdue, record enrollment. We have 1,000 more students on campus than we did last year, and record fundraising. Not all because of those, but it does play a role. And most recently, the Wall Street Journal just named us the #5 public university in the country. So that's why I'm here. I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Great. Ms. Neal?
Well, it is a pleasure to be with everyone today, and I promise I will not talk about botany, however much I want to. I get to talk about one of my very favorite subjects, accreditation. And we've been talking this morning about the changing environment in which higher education finds itself. And so I think it's interesting to look at accreditation as a system that really got started in or around 1965. We can call it an industrial system. And I'm going to submit to you, as ACTA has for many, many years, that this is a regulatory system that has failed, and that has led to many of the pathologies that we've been talking about and will be talking about this weekend. And that not only has it failed with the existing system, it is utterly unable to deal with the changing, unbundled dynamic that we're seeing in American higher education today. Just a little history. We go back to the GI Bill. We had numerous veterans coming back into the United States. Congress quite rightly wanted to provide them with student financial aid. And they quite rightly also wanted to protect that money. They wanted to make certain that it was going to schools that were not diploma mills, and it wanted to protect the taxpayer. So what it did was it took a voluntary system of accreditation that had existed since the late 19th century, and it decided that it would apply that as a gatekeeper for federal funds. So in other words, it took a peer review collegial system that had been in place, and it decided that these would be the bodies that would decide which schools could and could not receive funding. In essence, it put together two roles. One was self-improvement, which had been the large focus of the peer review teams, and then it added onto it a quality assurance requirement. This was, again, to protect taxpayers. So from the beginning, I'll submit to you, it had a schizophrenic problem because these two functions really don't go together very well. So it's a structural problem that we continue to deal with today. And I think, interestingly, when Congress decided to set up this system, it was proud of itself because it was, as it perceived, creating a private system of quality assurance, a private system of quality review. And while in days of yore that might have been the case, I think that this has put form over substance, and it continues to be a fundamental misunderstanding of this program. Because, for better or for worse, college accreditors now oversee billions in federal financial aid. And with very few exceptions, colleges and universities cannot survive without that federal money. So for all intents and purposes, accreditors really put a gun to the head of these institutions, which have to have federal financial aid. So to suggest today that these are private entities is, again, I think, failing to look at the fact that they are really agents of the federal government with massive power over massive funding. So what's happened over the years since accreditation was put into place? We had the opportunity to testify before the EEOC. And what we've found as we've looked at this program, that far from ensuring quality, far from protecting the consumer, it has in fact often duped the very students and families that it was designed to protect. If we look, we find that often first-generation students, often minority students, see that stamp of approval, accreditation, and assume that that means it is an institution of high quality, when in fact, many colleges and universities are accredited with single-digit graduation rates and very little prognosis for students to graduate. But under the system, it's impossible to tell. So since the accreditation process has been put into place, what has happened? Well, we know that college prices have gone up significantly. We know that student debt now is far higher than consumer debt. We know that learning is down. The Department of Education's National Survey of Student Engagement has found that college graduates cannot compare perspectives in two different editorials, that they have difficulty computing the cost of office goods when given in price of ounces. General education is something that accreditors pay a lot of attention to. If you look at almost any accrediting body's standards, general education will be prominent. But as ACTA has shown, most colleges and universities today have no coherent core curriculum that ensures that students are exposed to areas of knowledge and skills that they will need. We also see today that less than 60% are graduating in 6 years of first-time, full-time students. And as we've talked this morning, First Amendment issues, the free exchange of ideas, certainly something that is absolutely essential to a quality education, has been very much under siege on our college campuses. And over the last 30 or 40 years, while accreditors have been overseeing colleges and universities, we've seen a wide array of unconstitutional speech codes that have arisen, and yet nary a word from the accreditors about these problems. So why have we gotten to this situation? It pays us to take a look at some of the essentials of accreditors. They are, I would submit to you, an example of regulatory capture. Accreditors are largely made up of administrators and faculty who themselves benefit from accreditation. And in fact, we often find ABA is a good example of accreditors who have put into place standards which are more often guild-like than they are focused on educational quality. For instance, standards that privilege full-time professors, standards that limit the amount of online learning. And so it should be no wonder that often we find that these bodies of accreditors and administrators and faculty are helping to perpetuate the status quo of which they are a part. Accreditors are also membership associations. So if a college or university wants to be accredited, it has to join the accrediting body. It has to pay dues. And the accrediting body, of course, likes those dues and relies on those dues to continue. It's fair to say that it can be a very costly process. When the National Advisory Committee on Institutional Quality wanted to find out how much colleges and universities were spending, University of Michigan and Duke both responded that they were spending in excess of $1 million to go through the accreditation process. And one can only imagine what the burden is like for schools that are not so well heeled as they. Regional monopolies are another interesting component of accreditation. 85% of schools are accredited by what are known as regional accreditors. These are bodies that have literally carved up the United States into groups where they are virtually the sole provider. So when Purdue wants to be accredited, it essentially has one choice, the Higher Learning Commission. If the University of Virginia wants to be accredited, or the University of Florida, again, it has virtually one choice, the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools. And so since there is so little choice and no competition, it is fair to say that accreditors can often bully institutions because if they want federal funding, they need to listen to what the accreditors are saying. Another problem with accreditation is that while it is designed to protect the consumer, the only thing it offers is a seal of approval. If I'm a student, I can find that a university is accredited, but that's all I will know. I will not know its graduation rates. I will not know if it has a strong core curriculum. I am left with no operative information on which I can make a decision. And added to that is what I have often referred to as the self-referential nature of accreditation. It is set up where colleges and universities are asked to determine their standards of student learning, and then the accreditor simply evaluates whether or not the university is applying the standard that it has set in place. So what does that mean? That means, in essence, that if a school is accredited, you do not know, well, whether it has a certain graduation rate because there are no thresholds in the accreditation system. There is no graduation rate too low. There is no default rate too high. All of these standards vary from school to school. So why have we seen so many issues of educational quality? I think one reason is because faculty and administrators themselves have difficulty defining what they perceive to be educational quality. And so what has often happened is they've turned to other things. And one of them is governance. Governance and looking at the colleges and university trustees and what they're doing. How do they do this? They do this under a provision that we have called the blank check provision of the Higher Education Act. This essentially says to accreditors that you can adopt standards over and above those that are articulated in the statute. And in fact, many of the accreditors have done so. And it is in the area of governance that we have seen, in particular years, quite a bit of intrusion into college and university governance. We, I think, are all aware of the University of Virginia when it was attempting to look at its practices, and there was a decision about its president. One can dispute how it was handled, but it was clear in state law and in the bylaws of the University of Virginia board that they were responsible for these decisions. After they determined that they were going to fire the president and then ultimately rehire it, SACS, the accreditor, decided that it would get involved and basically slammed the board for its failure to consult the faculty on this decision, something that clearly was not required in state law. ACTA filed a complaint with the Department of Education at that time, arguing that this was intrusion in governance. And interestingly, we received an opinion back from then Secretary Arne Duncan, basically saying that because this was a matter that related to governance, that this was not something that the Department of Education could review. In essence, saying that the statute gives accreditors unreviewable power in areas such as governance. I think the most interesting example of how this has been played out was recently with the University of Louisville. I think we've all been reading stories about the culture of corruption there, where both finances, sports, and other things have come under question. The governor, Matt Bevins, in Kentucky, decided he was going to try to take a look at the board and remove it so that he could get a control on some of these issues. And was the accreditor happy that the governor, who was responsible for appointing trustees, was interested in accountability? Far from it. Rather than thanking the governor, Sachs and Bell Whelan decided that they would put the University of Louisville on probation. And their reason was that the governor was inappropriate external control of the university. So I think this is just one example recently of how accreditors have become part of a power play between the inside constituencies and the political and trustees outside. So what is the answer here? Well, wouldn't you know, the American Council of Trustees and Alumni does have an idea. Given all of these problems, it really seems that now is time for a change. And how timely, because Congress is anticipated to be reauthorizing the Higher Education Act, if not this year, in the near future. And what should we do when we have this opportunity? Trustees themselves, and we've seen it happening across the country, should certainly push back if accreditors are intruding in what is rightfully their governance responsibility. And it's interesting to see in Florida and other places, trustees have actually adopted special metrics and accountability systems that are designed to provide parents with actionable information that they would not otherwise receive from accreditors. But over and above that, we have an opportunity to encourage Congress to make a change. And ACTA would submit that it's time to decouple accreditation from the gatekeeping role. Let's return it to its voluntary system of self-improvement and provide a system that will ensure financial stability, something that obviously is critical to all students, and also insist that schools that want to be accredited provide an array of audited information regarding finances, demographic success, cost, and student learning gains so that the consumer can actually see whether or not the college or university is providing real value. Let's put an end to the black check, and let's also open up the regional monopolies. Let's let schools have a choice of accreditor if we do go forward with this system so that they can insert some competition. So that's just in brief some of the challenges and some of the opportunities.
Mr. Ludwig?
I didn't go to Harvard, Yale, Dartmouth, Purdue, Pepperdine, Columbia. I went to 2 community colleges and a 4-year school. I put myself through college, and so that gives me a very different perspective. So I'm on the Board of Regents for the University of Colorado, and we're one of 4 states that elect their boards, and there's a reason 46 other states don't do it that way. Because we're not all made up of CEOs, that's for sure. What I'm sharing about today are a couple things around innovation and ideas that trustees can use and supporters and alumni can look at and questions to ask. One thing I'll point out in your packet, I know there's a lot of reading material in there. I included an article that may or may not make me popular with some people in this room, and it's called Higher Education's Dirty Little Secret. And the idea is that reputation, which has been our lifeblood, the coin of the realm in higher education, has become our poison. The reason being is that we all chase reputation through academic research, but we're never honest about what the cost of that is to undergraduates, underserved student populations, and adult learners. Because we are so fixated on ourselves and our reputation, and there's a lot of legitimate reasons to be fixated on that, that there are people paying a price that we don't consider in hard costs from more dollars and opportunity costs from less time for undergraduates to have time with tenured and tenure-track faculty, which we assume are the best and the brightest that we can hire. And so I encourage you to look at that paper if that's of something of interest to you. I know some of the arguments will be controversial. People always ask me after I make that argument, it's like, don't you believe in research? Yes, of course I do. It has served our country well, it has served our communities well, but by us focusing on that at the expense of other things, I think we lose our eye on the prize. Which brings me to a driving philosophy that's in the paper, but also how I've chose to take my time as a regent and as a public servant, asking the question, whom do we serve? A lot of time trustees are alumni, and they think, well, we serve the institution. Our job is to elect the president and have that man or woman make sure the institution survives. My perspective is slightly different. Is how does the institution serve the people it was created to serve in the first place? When the University of Colorado, like many other universities, were founded as a state school, you got to it by a horse and buggy, and it was one building on a hill. The community came together, and communities came together to form colleges because we needed teachers, we needed ministers, and we needed lawyers. I'll leave out the lawyer joke because those have all been made already today, out of respect to my friend Anne. So, and then it expanded as the needs of the communities expanded, and there's great histories written about this. But we weren't created to create exclusive academic circles and clusters. Again, they have served us well. But it's the wrong focus, I would suggest. Nor were we created to create professional sports franchises, but that's really controversial, and I won't talk about that today. So the idea for the conference is Restoring Excellence, Ideas that Work for the 21st Century. So Michael Polynikoff and I used to work together at the University of Colorado, and so there's some things that I was able to start because of his help, and he always likes to remind me that everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And seeking facts has helped that transparency and help some innovation. So two things on transparency that may help you as you ask questions of your university or college. One is know your plant funds. What's a plant fund? It's where money goes in an institution, and it's divvied out from there. Some are allocated funds, and some are unallocated funds. And so the question is, with the funds, how much cash do you have? And the unallocated part especially, but both. So there's 4 questions, and there's a series on ACTA's website of videos with me 30 pounds heavier and very, very sweaty that are very enjoyable to watch for the entertainment value. But there's 4 questions in there. How much cash do we have? Who has it? What's it for? And did the board approve it? And you might be surprised, someone else mentioned money moves around, especially larger institutions. There is a ton of cash floating around. A lot of it's for perfectly legitimate, great reasons. The idea is it just needs to be transparent, and so we worked on that. One of the ways we worked on that was to track cash transfers from one year to the next. So a lot of times, anyway, I think that's self-apparent. Just making sure you know we're moving money from this year to the next. So at Purdue, where they didn't do tuition increases, one of the things they probably decreased was we're putting money aside, we're moving money forward each year. So that's one thing. So 3 areas of innovation. One is something I'm particularly proud of. It wasn't an original idea. I stole it from California, and I know other parts of the country have it, which is having a guaranteed admission for community college transfer students. Having been to community college myself, 2 of them, the state had put together articulation agreements that were very good, except students were still left wondering, can I actually get in to the school? And not knowing for these students that are generally broke would discourage them, and it was all an artificial bureaucratic barrier. We took that down. So if you get basically a B+ GPA, B- GPA, and you have 30 hours, which is basically 1 year full time, you're guaranteed admission if you take the right classes into any of our 3 general campuses. The University of Colorado has 4 campuses. We have about a $4.1 billion budget and about 60,000 students. We just announced the elimination of all course-specific fees at the CU Boulder campus. So a lot of times students can't plan on the price of college. And I say students, I know a lot of times we say college kids. The reason I don't say college kids is because a lot of students are putting themselves through school. There's a lot of students that are not traditional. If you're raising a family, if you're taking on debt, if you have a job while you're going on and going to school at the same time, how in the world is that childlike? How are you a kid if that's what your life is? I know that a lot of us in the room had a traditional college experience. You went at 18, you left at 21 or 22. A lot of students these days aren't doing that. And that framework, we still think children, causes us to have challenges. So we eliminated those fees for courses, saving students $8.4 million per year. And basically, if we're honest about course fees, they're just backdoor tuition increases. And I'm very proud of the Boulder campus for getting that done. The last thing I'll talk about is the 3-year online-only degree that will start in 2018 this fall, this coming fall. The reason that's significant, if you paid attention to higher education, we do not play well together at all. It's embarrassing. We know that departments don't cooperate. I have 3 general campuses. They can't seem to cooperate on much. And so what this is sort of the camel nose under the tent, because the 3-year degree requires classes to be included from each general campus. So you eliminate program duplication, you teach people to cooperate together, and you solve some of those institutional barriers to success. Thank you.
So I'm going to start with a question for Mike Adams, and others feel free to jump in. I'm wondering about the balance of the strong traditional core that you have to strike with potential additions to a curriculum. I wrote about the Business Education Forum's recommendation that all undergraduates take a data science course now. And a really interesting, compelling argument for why that is, regardless of your academic track. But there are some tensions about adding to a core, but yet you don't want to get into the sort of situation that Complete College America has documented of 140 credits for a 120 credit bachelor's degree. How do you navigate that, particularly as a leader?
Well, I think like most things in life, the best answer is in balance. And one has to seek balance with a diverse group of entities, certainly with a very diverse group of faculty. I have come down on the side of the first 2 years of curriculum being more traditional than not, as I mentioned in some of the things that I said. On the other hand, I think there has been substantial broadening of what we do in the 3rd and 4th year of undergraduate education. And let me tell you, Paul, what concerns me even more about what's happening curriculum-wise is what I characterize as the over-professionalization of undergraduate education. I have a very good friend who's a PhD from Chapel Hill. He's the president of a major German chemical corporation. And I asked him recently, would you rather a kid have a year of study in Germany or take 2 more chemistry courses? Because most of these sort of things usually bump up against faculty preferences. And without any hesitation, he said, I want them to have the foreign experience. We have, and to be fair with my friend Anne, whom I agree with on a lot of things, specialized accreditation is one of the reasons that makes it more and more difficult for more and more kids to have a worldview. And so again, we've got to seek balance in these areas. I think most young people today still need to learn to think critically, to speak articulately, to write well. The notion that they all come out of high school with those abilities means that someone hasn't been in the classroom with them very much, and in my opinion, and then I think there is enough flexibility, and I think curricula do need to change and grow consistent. I was at Stanford Monday and Tuesday of this week, and some of the stuff that's being done today at the Stanford Research Institute were things I couldn't dream of when I was in undergraduate school 40 years ago. But by the same token, those core skills are pretty important as far as a building block, and then there ought to be room in the faculty for diversification and for growth as we go along.
Great. Next question for Mike Berghoff. Arizona State, we all in the higher education media have written a lot about, for good reason, because they're trying a lot of things. And I have to say Purdue is rivaling that these days. I feel like I'm writing about Purdue on like a weekly basis now. And I did a panel with Mitch Daniels on the Purdue Kaplan acquisition, which, by the way, there's not a lot of unique stories in higher education. That's a unique story. It really is. But he made a really convincing case for why you all did this. And one of the reasons was to expand the land-grant mission to the 750,000 adults in Indiana who have some college, no degree. But he also talked about the long game of needing to go online. And I wonder, from a board perspective, from your perspective, where's the urgency coming from? Because I would bet that Purdue's going to be all right in 20 years, 40 years. It'll still be an important part of global higher education. Why take these risks now to try to forge into online?
Well, part of it was because the opportunity presented itself. Mm-hmm. We had been fishing around for a way to add to our online offering, because we were, of the Big Ten, if we weren't last, we were close in the number of credit hours. We had tried 2 or 3 times to get it launched, and it didn't go well. It mostly consisted of a professor filming a lecture, and then the students would access that. Right. And so we didn't have really a sense of urgency. We said, well, maybe we'll just see where this goes. And at the same time, the number of undergraduates who receive at least one program online has tripled in 6 years. So we were getting a little nervous about that. Sure. So when the opportunity presented itself, it forced the question. Do we believe we have an obligation as a land-grant university to try and provide degrees to adult learners, 36 million adult learners, 80% of which have some credit hours from a university. 25% of those, at least in the Kaplan world, 60% were over 30 years old, 75% were women, 25% were military. So it kind of tugs on your land-grant emotions. And that was the first question we had to answer. Did the board agree we had an obligation? And once we did, once we agreed that we thought we did, and I'm not sure there was a right answer there, but once we agreed that we thought we did, the rest of it made a lot of sense because of the deal.
Sure.
And hold on, can I comment on that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
We all have that obligation, and the fact that we don't do it is appalling to me. Absolutely appalling. Thank you for, I know it's a huge risk. You'll take some bumps on the way, but the reason the University of Phoenix exists is because we didn't do our job, is my sense, right? We thought, ooh, bottom feeders, adult learners, we're not interested because we want 18-year-olds because that's the best and the brightest, because if you're not in college at 18, you're an idiot, right? Clearly. And we act that way, and we're judged on, oh, our admissions, wow, we're more exclusive than we ever used to be. Our trustees are really happy because our reputation went up, but it's who are we serving?
Yeah. And
so thank you for, and I'm passionate about this. So thank you for what you're doing, and we're behind, and a lot of us are behind, and if the more students you help, the better off we all are.
Well, can I just follow up on that?
Sure.
As somebody who writes about open access institutions, adult students, there's a lot of activity in the space, a lot of scrutiny. You're in an environment where right and left agree that workforce is an urgent pressing need that higher education has to get better about. What's it going to take for more to move where Purdue has gone? And I have to say, it is rare. You're right. We're not seeing research universities feeling like they need to go after adult students and meet them where they are. I mean, what are we getting close to a tipping point in any way that you see?
Well, the earlier panel talked about external pressures and talked about accreditation. What I've found the universities respond to are three major areas. There's more I'm sure we could get. One, they respond to threats from the legislature. Either we're going to take your autonomy away or we're going to take your money away. And that gets everyone's attention really fast. They pay attention to bad press. They can't stand it because they all still read the newspaper, right? They can't stand bad press. It took me 10.5 years as a board member to figure out they hate cranky trustees. They don't like that at all either. And they respond to trustees that are organized and thoughtful and what have you. And so those are the three things that they're responding to. Now, there are other market pressures and smaller, and every college is unique and has its own thing. But those are the three drivers. And because we're seen as, whom do we serve? Are we really about, I love faculty. I really, really do. But are we about creating an environment for them just to be scholars with no accountability? And we need some of that. Or are we about serving the community? And because we haven't had the thought of whom do we serve properly, we've gotten into this thing of we're all about academic societies. Aren't we great because we have more scholars than anyone else? It's like, well, how about these adult learners that are left behind, and we're all taxpayers kicking in on this? And that goes for nonprofit colleges that get tax breaks and federally funded financial aid. So we're all on the hook. I think, I know. Sorry, I get excited about this stuff.
That's a good point. So Anne, looking forward, I feel like there's been more discussion than I've heard previously in the accreditation space of the potential for bright lines, for being more aggressive in holding institutions accountable for graduation rates, various outcomes that make colleges pretty scared. First of all, I'm assuming you probably don't think that a bright line approach is the right way to go for accreditors, but I wonder if you could address that and the potential for something like that happening.
Well, I think the demand for a bright line has come from frustration with the existing accreditation system. Because, in fact, accredited institutions can have 6–7% graduation rates. So I think the consumer quite rightly wants to know if this institution is accredited, what does that mean? Sure. Does that mean that the government should be establishing bright lines? I don't think that's the answer. And in fact, if trustees are doing their job, they will have established standards at their institutions which should do the job that the accreditors are not doing. And as I've said, we've seen that happen. So I think that one of the reasons that ACTA has this alternative, which would allow existing accreditors to remain but would provide an alternative expedited approach, it would allow existing institutions that are financially secure and can ensure that they are having student learning gains, that there is a delta, that this would be a simpler, better, transparent, consumer-friendly approach that would not require the imposition of bright lines by governmentally authorized bodies. How would this happen? I mean, there are entities like the Collegiate Learning Assessment, the GRE, a whole array of nationally normed exams which can show whether or not the institution is actually adding learning gains for that student. So if, for instance, the CLA, which is not a one-size-fits-all exam, with that kind of an exam, a school that has a more challenging population could show that it is adding value, that it is doing its job as an educator. And shouldn't that be what accreditation is about? So I think this kind of an alternative, which allows the institutions to provide transparent information, to show about their health, and to provide data about student learning gains, is a far better way than having, again, a federally imposed bright line standards.
Sure. So I think we have about 15 minutes, so I'm going to open it up for questions from you all. As with the previous panel, if you could wait till the microphone gets to you. I think I see one over here. And introduce yourself if you can, and please try to have a question in your statement.
It's in your statement.
We've got a microphone coming over here, and then we'll head that way.
Hi, I'm Diana Spencer. Anne, I was really interested in the whole accreditation process and with bureaucracy. I just wonder, how do you break into that? How is ACTA facing or being met by bureaucrats who are enmeshed in this process?
Well, again, I mean, this is a system that has been empowered by Congress. So ultimately, relief from accreditors will need to come from Congress. And I think this is where trustees, taxpayers, students can really raise their voices, saying that they don't feel that the accreditation system has helped. It doesn't give them information. Certainly trustees have seen accreditation used to impose various standards. I mean, I can remember it was the accreditor on social work was imposing social justice standards within the institution, something that was really going to the very mission, and this was being imposed externally. So it requires institutions to speak out when they are being bullied, and I think it requires trustees and others, and faculty too, to speak out to the college, to Congress, to basically say this is a system that has overseen higher costs and has not guaranteed greater quality, and there has got to be a better system that will give institutions the opportunity to spend the money the way they would like, all the while providing accountability to the public in easier reporting ways.
I think I saw first one here, and then back that way.
In the gap, I might just add that I'm leaving here today to go prepare for the Higher Learning Commission's visit to campus next week, and their visit is to decide whether the new Kaplan, which right now we're calling New U, we don't have a name for it yet, is going to get accreditation. Even though Kaplan was just recently, their accreditation was just approved through 2026. So there are some on our campus who think this is not a done deal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Otherwise, why would I be going through a prep call?
Yeah.
So,
right.
Dr. Adams, you had alluded to the Presbyterian heritage of the school. I noticed one thing that's happened in higher education is almost all schools try to be all things to all people. So a general question is, do you think academia would be helped if more colleges had deliberate identity, that if you went to Georgetown, you'd have to take a course in Catholic history or Haverford Quaker history and so forth, and colleges just said what they are and had that identity? And with that, if colleges did that, would that have any accreditation issues?
Yeah. Well, let me answer it like this. I think we would all be better off if college and universities' missions were more clearly stated, and I think there's a shortcoming there. I also must say that along with the mission, the fulfillment of the mission through curricula, et cetera, are important for parents. I think more and more in a pluralistic society, we need different kinds of institutions. I'm one of these weird animals. I've been in small religiously affiliated, medium, and large publics, 2 and 2. I think they all have things to add to this fabric that's America. I hope going forward that the accrediting agencies, particularly the specialized accrediting agencies, will back off their one-size-fits-all mentality. I think that's one of the problems that we have, and I'll end with a commercial with a place that I have no benefit nor affiliation from whatsoever. But 3 weekends ago, my younger son and his wife live in Chicago, and my older son and his wife from Atlanta, and Mary and I flew to Chicago, rented a car, and went down to Notre Dame for the weekend because Georgia was playing at Notre Dame. Happily, that turned out as God intended it, but The thing that struck me, and I'd been at Notre Dame 2 or 3 times for a meeting before. I was actually on a board for a while with Father Hesburgh, and I knew a bit about it, but I'd never been to a football game there. And I must say, even on a football Saturday, from the moment you walked on that campus until the moment you left, you knew who they were, what they were about, what their mission was, and who they were serving. Now, for this guy who's spent a part of his life in Protestant institutions, I learned some things on that day. So I don't think we all have to look the same, act the same, speak the same, but I think who we are and what we are and our mission to the parents and the students that we're recruiting needs to be more clear than historically it's been.
Well said. Over here.
Yeah, hi, Matt Waters with Students for Liberty, but more importantly, a father of 5, homeschool dad. My question is, what changes might colleges be making in the face of 3 million plus homeschoolers who are doing education online, who are very independent? I mean, we have an 18-year-old home, and we're looking at multiple colleges, some even out of the country, in fact. Is that even on your radar screen at all?
Take that on.
I'll take just a couple of thoughts on that. One of the first things that we did shortly after I got on board and Mitch got on board was to partner up with the Gallup research folks to understand what creates a sense of, what do they call it? It's well-being, but I can't remember the beginning part, but amongst students who graduate, and how do they look back on their college career now that they're in the working world? And what level of satisfaction did they have for preparing for the working world? And there were 5 things. I won't remember all 5. But 2 or 3 of them were unique to traditional campuses. One was participating in a research project with a group. Study abroad was another one. Mentoring with a college professor was another one. But at least a couple of them would be really tough to duplicate outside of a traditional college. And so, Mitch calls it the pajama test. That's what we're competing against, the person who wants to get a degree from their living room in their pajamas. We have to offer something that gets them out of there, up to campus, whether it be a regional campus or a traditional campus. And those were just a couple of things that came out of the Gallup.
Anyone else want to jump on that? All right, other questions? I think back here and then up to the front, or? Yep.
My name is Jeff True from Ithaca, New York. My question has to go to the number of institutions that are out there. In the business world, when a business closes, it's a cleansing process. And the market has spoken to say that there's too much of whatever it is that does. Are there too many institutions, and have we gotten to the point where we're too big to fail?
Good question. Mike?
Well, I don't think we're too big to fail. I mean, I think there are more and more colleges and universities that are failing every day. There's also, in Georgia, for instance, there's a series of mergers going on, most of which I agree with, where we've reduced administrative costs and enhanced faculty participation in the end result. Unfortunately, the small privates are the ones who seem to be under the greatest level of marketing questioning, for lack of a better word, right now. A lot of that has to do with resources. Mm-hmm. I personally think that we're all better off with this broad panoply of places. I'm glad we have places like Pepperdine and Notre Dame, as well as places like Georgia and Purdue. It's part of the heritage and the history.
I think you were looking for Colorado in that last example.
I do like Boulder. I'm not trying to ignore them at all, but I think the whole point of the diversity of the population that we're trying to serve. In the spirit of full disclosure, we're proud of Walter Dillard, who was here earlier, who's a UGA undergrad and got some things right in the process. The HBCUs need financial help right now in the worst sort of ways. So everybody's got to decide where they plug in, whether or not it is the pajama guy that's been mentioned here or a more traditional experience at Notre Dame. And hopefully everybody will find their own niche and learn something in the process.
Just a very quick note on that. Georgia was ahead of the curve with the mergers for sure, but if you might check out, Wisconsin is now going down that path as well, and I suspect other states will as well.
So I know my state the best, and part of the challenge is when you have a rural area that has a college that has a declining population that naturally supported that college, the lawmakers at the state level don't want to unfund it because it would have a huge economic impact on the community. And so for some of these state colleges that are struggling, the economic impact is part of the equation, and so part of the reluctance to shutter a college would be that. The other challenge is, does each college have its own board to determine its own fate, let it survive or fail, or this consolidation where you eliminate stuff and people are undecided about what the best approach is?
Can I take two things? I think when you look at a lot of these small liberal arts colleges without endowments, that increasingly the trustees are really going to have to take on that question you're raising. Are they able to raise the revenue and to survive, or do they need to rethink whether or not they can continue to survive? It's a very tough question, and no board ever wants to bite the bullet, but I think that will necessarily have to be a question for many boards of trustees. I want to take another quick look at the too big to fail, and I want to take it back to the accreditation, because I think this is also an interesting aspect of the existing system. We have regional accrediting bodies which oversee 85% of our schools, and when the issue comes up about their performance, I think it is so very interesting that often I hear at the National Advisory Committee on Institutional Quality, where I sit, that, well, we couldn't possibly shut down that accreditor, notwithstanding its performance, because where would all those students go? And so, in a perverse way, the process that's been put in place to evaluate accreditors and determine whether or not they're doing a good job has been succumbing to this idea that, well, we couldn't shut that down because it's too big, essentially too big to fail. So I had to get that in.
I think we've got time for just one last question up here.
Good morning. My name is Patrick Chodovony. I'm from American University. And I have a question regarding to Chairman Berghoff about, so recently The Guardian has published an article stating that from 1975 to 2008, administrative staff has grown over 200%, while faculty has grown over only 10%. And I would like to ask, how has cutting administrative faculty played a role in your program of decreasing costs and rebuilding the business model, and have you sacrificed any programs doing that?
Well, there's been some reduction in the administration. Somebody would leave, we just didn't replace them. Like, the best example I can give you is our chief marketing officer.
It's always the marketing guy.
Well, it was our first. We never had one before. We don't have one again. Right. But I'm not saying we don't need one. So there were probably 3 or 4 or 5 examples like that. But we didn't go really through a formalized reduction on the administrative side. We're happy to take it where we wanted it. We just didn't add folks. And then secondly, to help offset the tuition freeze, the other thing we did, which is I didn't mention, is we added 1,000 students. And so the revenue number goes up. Now, we didn't do that because of the tuition freeze. We did that because we changed our mind about who we really wanted to serve. When I first came to the board, I wanted to shrink the place down. I wanted to enhance our reputation by making it tougher to get in. And then the rest of us on the board, including Mitch, you know, kind of had a change of thought, and we just went in the other direction. And what we found, surprisingly, was that at least so far, the academic profile of the incoming students has continued to increase. It won't last forever, but at least up to the 1200 edition, each incoming class has improved.
That's all the time we have. I hope you'll join me in giving a hand of applause to our panelists.